Hi guys, it's Matt from CTRL-S again. Now last week we touched on the potential pitfalls of AI and how you need to check the work, but this week I thought, certainly given the government's new announcement that they're putting about 800 million towards unleashing AI across the UK. So I thought I'd put a spotlight on how effective it can be as well. So as a tech company, you know, we're all over this sort of stuff, and we use Microsoft quite heavily. Now, on a really basic level, you know, we've put Microsoft Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI, onto our subscription, and I use it heavily in Teams, especially Teams meetings. So when we have our Teams meetings now, I've got AI sat in the background in the form of Copilot, transcribing and generating notes and actions from all my meetings. And honestly, I can't tell you the amount of time it's saved trying to either write up written notes or remember what was said during a meeting and type them into an email, sending them out to people. You know, the AI, the Copilot stuff in Teams is a fantastic tool for businesses, especially when you're talking about creating actions. Every meeting should have actions, and therefore, you know, every Teams meeting you come off, there'll be actions off the back of it. Copilot in Teams, Microsoft's AI, does all that automatically for you. It makes the actions, it assigns them to the right people. It's, in my opinion, an amazing tool. Now, yeah, it's not always accurate, but the amount of time I've saved doesn't bother you spending 10 minutes going through those notes, making sure that the things it's written are right, because you know you don't have to spend half an hour to an hour putting all those notes together. Now, if you times that by the amount of meetings you might have a day, you can quickly see how beneficial AI can be in business as long as you follow the right processes and systems when implementing it. If you're interested in AI, you're interested in Microsoft or Copilot, just let us know, give us a shout. Be happy to show you the ropes, show you a bit of the basic stuff you can do. And yeah, that's this week's vid, so see you soon.